Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take you to another continent where it's warmer and back in time to the Inca, which were the largest civilization of the Americas prior to the conquest of the Spanish. And the one thing that the Inca are most well known for is the idea that they were master stonemasons, that they were able to build buildings and walls with such accuracy that you couldn't fit, some people say, a credit card, but in fact a human hair in between the joints. And some of these walls are 300 feet long. So my question on my first trip to Cusco was, how is it possible that they could do that? Because the stone that they used, or stones, were andesite and granite and basalt, and all three of those are incredibly hard stones. They're on the Mohs scale, which is the technical scale, going from 1 to 10, going from talc, which is soapstone, and that's 1 to 10, which is diamond. Most of these are between 6 and 7. And in the archaeological record, the only tools that are found are bronze chisels and stone hammers. Bronze is about 3 on the Mohs scale, so it's literally like trying to saw through a log with a plastic knife. You can't do it, because the material itself is harder than the tools. So that was my initial question. And what I seem to have discovered was that there were two civilizations that preceded the Inca, and they were much more highly technically advanced than the Inca themselves. And that goes counter to conventional thought, where civilizations always go in a line of increasing sophistication. But what seems to be not only in South America but also globally is that you have cycles of time and you have cycles of civilization. So you have crests and then you have troughs, and that's where the Atlantis concept comes in. So this is the fanciful depiction of who the Inca originators were. Well, golly. And this is a Peruvian artist. So what you have is Peruvian people and others who go, oh my God, they were gods. And then you have the Spanish conquistadors who basically thought they were savages. So obviously the reality of the Inca is somewhere in between. They were human beings. Where did they come from, and where did they, what happened to them? Most stories say that they came from the Lake Titicaca area, which is half of it's in Peru and half of it's in Bolivia. And so when you read all of the oral traditions and the Spanish chronicles, you find out that the island of the sun, which is in the Bolivian half, is probably one of the places where the Inca originated. And this is an Inca-style building. Now, if you look at that, you'll see that it's almost the equivalent of some cottages you'll find here. It's basically dry stacked stone, or in some cases they used adobe mud as a mortar because they didn't know cement. Cement came with the Spanish later on. And then here again is another example of an Inca building. But this isn't what you would think of, those who have been to Peru or those who have read about them, of classic Inca. It's supposed to be perfect, almost perfect construction. And this is on the island of the moon, which is next to the island of the sun. And you see this is adobe construction mixed with stone, and that is classic Inca. The Inca were a huge civilization, and they had to, by necessity, build quite rapidly. So the incredible stone constructions would have been not only time-consuming, but again, the toolkit isn't there in the archaeological record. But you see examples of this throughout Cusco and the Sacred Valley of Peru. The other possible location is Tiwanaku in Bolivia, which is just south of Lake Titicaca. And this, you look at this and you think, well, my God, that's very sophisticated. But the thing to take into account is that all of this was reconstructed in the 1960s. So the only original stones are the standing stones you see here. Everything else was taken from the surrounding area and reassembled according to what the archaeologists thought this structure looked like. So it's very deceiving. You look at that and you go, oh my God, that's sophisticated. This is the famous Gate of the Sun, which is at Tiwanaku. And that's one solid piece of andesite stone. A human being, can walk through there. And you see the crack that is coming down on that side of it. It was found snapped in two, as if there had been a giant cataclysm at some time in the distant past. Some people say the Spanish did that, but the Spanish didn't break it. It was actually found half sunk in the mud, suggesting that it has great antiquity and that some major catastrophe happened in the distant past and destroyed the site. And that's precisely what we find at what's called Pumapunku. Amazing shaping of stones, but the whole thing is literally like a giant came and picked everything up and threw it all over the place. Most of the stones lean in one direction, and that's towards Lake Titicaca. So it's as if a giant wave of mud came and swept through the entire place and just toppled everything over. Also, it's been mined for its materials since the Spanish arrived there up until very recently. So only about 5% of Pumapunku still exists. And this is the sort of thing that still, we can still find there. And you see the astonishing accuracy of this. This is as if a tool came and cut through that material. It's completely even from bottom till top. And these holes are exactly the same size, as if somebody in the distant past had a drill and was able to drill these holes into that stone, which again is between 6 and 7 out of 10 on the hardness scale. And this is how some Germans have reassembled what the original stones looked like. And you can see the astonishing complexity. This is not the work of Stone Age people wearing loincloths. It's something from the distant past. I'm not going to give you a timeline because we don't know, but it's an indication that we're missing something in history. And also these skulls have been found at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, and you can see that they're larger than normal. The cranial volume is also larger than the average human being of today or at that time, so that adds to the mystery. And this is again the depiction of of the Inca. They were forced out of the Lake Titicaca area about 950 AD as the result of a 50-year drought. And the Aymara people swept in and forced them to leave. And so what they did, it wasn't just these two. This is Manco Capac and his wife and sister, Mama Oklo. They didn't simply flee. They headed north along a road that existed before them. And I believe they knew exactly where they were going based on oral traditions. And this is another depiction. The thing is that the Spanish, the King of Spain at the time sent artists to paint the Inca because he wanted to know who these so-called kings were and what they looked like. But unfortunately, more than 90% of the Inca royal family were murdered prior to the Spanish arrival. There was a civil war that happened as the result of smallpox, and that's why the Spanish had a very easy time of conquering the Inca, was that they were already rapidly crumbling as a civilization. But the only surviving people they saw had long black hair and facial features like this, but that is not necessarily a true depiction of what the Inca looked like because the Inca didn't draw themselves. But this is probably closer to what they looked like, short cropped hair like that, and they wore large earrings. So they were actually called the long ears, which draws in tangentially a relationship possibly with Easter Island. It's possible that the Inca or their forebears traveled to Easter Island and they were the ruling family there as well. Their destination was the Sacred Valley, which is close to Cusco, and it's called sacred because it's incredibly productive as regards agriculture. The entire valley floor still grows corn, and the terracing system goes from the valley floor all the way to the tops of mountains. And this is called the Vilcanota River. It's called the Sacred River, and it travels from the Andes and winds up being part of the Amazon and going into the Atlantic. This is the construction by the Wari people who preceded the Inca. They were a great civilization. And this is intact walls that are still present. But what the Inca would have encountered on their travel north towards Cusco is this gate. And as you can see, there are two distinct styles of construction. You have this and you have that. That is classic Inca. Again, we have stone, which could have been shaped with stone hammers and bronze chisels with adobe mud in between. But this is megalithic. And this has the accuracy where you cannot fit a human hair in between the joints. So I believe that the Inca, when they were traveling north, encountered that, that wall as it was, and they were in awe. So what they did is they simply added onto it, and added this, the great area you can see behind it. And this is the Coricancha, which is in the center of Cusco. This is called the Church of Santo Domingo, which was built on top of an Inca, or so-called Inca foundation. And as we come closer, you see the accuracy of the construction. The Spanish used a lot of mortar, and they recycled Inca buildings to build all of their buildings. But that, you can see gaps, but that's probably the result of earthquakes, because Cusco is very earthquake prone. But that's very complicated. It's not simply a straight wall. It's got the curve as well. And to build that would be very difficult. The stone is basalt, and it comes from 50 kilometers away. And that gives you a bit more of detail. And this is what the Coricancha originally looked like when the Spanish arrived in 1533. And then we also have these fascinating things, which I believe are also found, not necessarily the shape, but they're also found in Egypt. And this is where bronze was poured in order to supposedly strengthen the walls. It's almost like a clasp of some kind. So that meant they had to have localized bronze foundries to be able to pour that into place. And this is another example in the wall of the Coricancha that's been recycled by the Spanish. And then other intriguing and strange-looking constructions and this so-called door, which actually isn't a door. And then this. That's a hole 2.5 feet long, and it's perfectly circular, as if somebody in the ancient past had the technology of a drill and was able to bore straight through it. And this is and this is the interior of the Coricancha. Again, you see the incredible precision of the stonework. And in the middle of the Coricancha is this, some people call it a tub or bowl. It's one piece of solid basalt. And in order to shape that would have taken an incredible amount of time. No one knows what the function was. And what the Inca did is that they made the Coricancha the center not only of the city of Cusco, but of their entire civilization. And there are these energy lines that run from the Coricancha outwards, and they're called seke lines. And along the lines at these points are places which are called huacas. And they're either buildings or trees or ponds which are deemed sacred. So the Coricancha was the epicenter of the Inca civilization from their beginning in Cusco up until the arrival of the Spanish. And again, this gives you an idea of the precision of the joinery that I believe they didn't make, but they found, including that little tiny piece there. And that is about that size. And the question is, why would you bother? Were they fanatics about precision? Or was it that the building had to be so tightly fitted that it had a specific vibration, and that the whole building itself had more than simply a ceremonial function? This road is from the Inca period, and on the solstices, the sun rises directly up this way. And then it would shine, the sun would shine straight into what was the Temple of the Sun, whose walls were all sheeted in gold. And so the whole room that the sun shone into would glow. But what's more intriguing is as we close in on this, you'll see three different levels of construction. This is green granite from about 30 kilometers away, and it's megalithic. And then on the left-hand side, this is a grayer stone, basalt, and it's not quite as tight-fitting. And then over here is what I regard as being classical Inca. So I think what this indicates is that you're looking at three different civilizations and simply the recycling of one structure. The megalithic came first, something happened to the building, the next culture came and built here, and then finally the Inca added on to the right-hand side. And these are also what are, there's a little museum underneath the Coricancha, and these skulls are found. Again, very similar to what is found in Tiwanaku. They have never been carbon-14 tested or DNA tested. So we have no idea how old they are. They're labeled as being Inca, but that's as far as it goes. When you ask the people who work there, they just go, well, we don't know. But that's the core of my research, is the study of these elongated skulls and to find out who they were, where they came from, and when actually they lived. And the DNA and carbon-14 testing is about to start. That it's not really my ego that I put myself into a lot of pictures, but this gives you simply a sense of scale. Again, you see the corner, which is the green granite, and then you have the stone here with the adobe. And some might suggest that, well, the corners would be made stronger, and that's why they used that. But we find examples of this megalithic construction in patches around Cusco. So it's not necessarily just in the corners, but it looks literally as if either someone has deconstructed the building or that some catastrophe happened, and that's all that was left. And the next people to come, the final being the Inca, simply used that and incorporated that into the structure of their building. And here's another example. This is the outer wall of the Coricancha, and it's technically incredibly precise. Again, you can't fit a human hair in between most of these stones. And then later, it looks like we have a recycling system here, whereby a broken section of the wall is reconstructed, and adobe is shoved in between. And then even later, you have an even cruder form. So rather than, again, civilizations going straight up, in this case, it seems to be going that way. And this is another form of construction, and I think a different time period. You see, it's polygonal. The conventional thought is that the Inca builders would find a stone, roughly shape it, put it into place, find another stone, which would be, of a different shape, roughly shape it, and try to integrate it in. However, thanks to oral tradition and local expertise, in fact, what this wall is, it's a series of pictograms. So this, though it doesn't look like it, is the head of a puma. And that's what we see here. You see the outline? This stone is that one. And there's the body, the two legs, and the tail coming up. And the majority of tour guides in Cusco know this, but most tourists are never taught that. And this one again, that is the head of a snake. You can see the eye. And again, you can think it's my imagination until I show you that picture. And that again, you see the tongue, the head, and the body. This is in Japan. This is actually at the Royal Palace in Tokyo. And what it suggests is that the megalithic builders who existed in Peru in the ancient past may also have existed around the Pacific Rim as well. The style isn't exactly the same, but it's the same kind of pillowy look that we saw in the previous picture. And that again is at the Imperial Palace in Japan. A very tough volcanic stone. And this is on Easter Island. This is called Vinapu, and it's actually the only example of this. There's a lot of stone construction on Easter Island, but this example looks, in some ways, eerily similar to what we find in Cusco. And this again is an Inca wall. You can see how the stone has been recycled. This was precision cut at some point. But then the giveaway again is the adobe mud mortar, because the Spanish brought with them the knowledge of how to make cement. So anything that has cement as mortar is Spanish. Anything that doesn't is either the early attempts of the Spanish or in fact the Inca culture rebuilding something. And that is one of the best examples, I think, of how the Inca achieved their construction with bronze chisels and stone hammers. It's quite tight-fitting, but it's nothing of the accuracy of some of the other examples that I've shown and will show. And this is how I think how the Inca tried to replicate the look of the ancient past. The front is very tight-fitting looking, and the back as well. But on the inside, you have this fill. So as a veneer, their buildings would have looked incredibly precise. But because of this and other examples where the walls have been broken, we can see the interior, and we can see that it's just a veneer. And I think they were attempting to copy the megalithic builders. And here's another view of it. You see, if you just saw that, you would say, well, that's very well done. But when you see the interior, you see that it's a pie shape. To make the front fit like that would be time-consuming, but nothing compared to making the whole thing fit together. That is an example of this is how the Spanish built their buildings, and this is why when there's an earthquake in Cusco, the buildings crumble, because the mortar gives, with the vibration of the shock waves, the mortar gives way, and the buildings tumble, and you can't even see it. But this is the original builders here. It's not even a hairline that you can see, but that is a join between this stone and that stone. And this is another example of that. This wall is 3 feet thick. And this is the join, and the join goes from here 3 feet through to the other side, and because the wall's broken, it's seamless from this point to that point. And that is something we could achieve today with great expense and difficulty, but how could the Inca have possibly achieved that with bronze chisels and stone hammers? This is Sachsayhuaman, which is the largest megalithic structure in South America, or in the Americas. You can see the people there. It's an example of scale. And that's me giving you an example of the size. It isn't just that this stone is 17 feet high. Through the earthquakes and other activity, this wall has never moved. And this stone, in fact, goes down into the ground by 12 feet. So it's, in fact, 29 feet tall. And it weighs 125 tons. And how it's possible for these people to have moved that stone from the quarry is another thing. I'm not undermining the brilliance of the Inca. I'm just questioning how was it technically possible, because the trees located in Cusco are very small, and they branch off very close to the base. So you don't have logs that you could use as rollers. And this other structure is quite astonishing. This is the wall in behind. But this, again, is andesite stone. And the surfaces are almost perfectly flat. So how is it, again, how is it possible that they were able to shape that? And this gives you a front view of it. The story that the tour guides give is that this was, whenever you see a flat surface, they call that an Inca throne. The trouble is that there are more than 5,000 of them, so the Inca were obviously, moving around and sitting down a lot. And what they say is, well, this is where the Inca, again, this is the problem with a lot of the tour guides in Cusco, unfortunately, is that they don't really, to some degree, tend to think as much as they possibly could, and I'm not, degrading them, but what they say is the Inca would sit here and they would watch the performances that would happen in the courtyard, but the courtyard's down here, so they would have to turn their heads 90 degrees to look at it. In fact, what this structure is pointing to is this mountain, which is called Ausangate, which is a sacred mountain to the Inca, but probably to their forebears as well. And all over Cusco in the Sacred Valley, we find these. Some people have said, well, those are quarries. The trouble is, again, with the tools that the Inca had, how could they extract the stone? And like what I just said, it's not that we have one example or 10 examples or 15. This is a simple example of more than 5,000 structures in the area where this cleaving or removal of like a cube-like stone has been done. And this is one of the larger examples of it. This is called the Chincana. And you can see, again, for sense of scale, there are people on top of it. But you see these supposed staircases, some of which literally go nowhere. It looks kind of random, so you would think possibly that it could be a quarry. And on one side we have this, which is regarded again as being a throne of the Inca, and then the throne of his wife, and the throne of the high priestess, who was called the Virgin of the Sun. So that looks like, it's a very grand looking structure, and you'd think, there would be a sweeping field out in front or something like that for them to make their declarations. But in fact, 20 feet away we find this wall, and this is of the Inca period. So I think the Chincana pre-existed the Inca, and this area would have been probably open, and the later Inca people came and constructed this terracing system there. There's a lot of things that are simply out of place. There's a lack of logic that started my whole interest in this when I was being guided around Cusco. And this is a giant slab of stone. You can roughly make out a staircase here. That was actually up and against this wall and snapped off at some point, and it landed right on top of what is a tunnel. The dropping of the stone sealed off the tunnel, and they've done sonograms, and there's a staircase that goes down 160 stairs straight down, and then a tunnel which is much larger than a human being can walk that goes from this side of Sachsayhuaman to the Coricancha in Cusco. It's about 2 miles long. Again, some people suggest that the Inca built the tunnels, but they didn't have the technology possible to cut through solid stone, which is what you have here. And again, this is simply another one of these examples of these outcrops that have been shaped. And this is called the Temple of the Moon, which is close to Sachsayhuaman and to the Chincana I showed you. And you can actually enter here, and that's my wife. I'm on the inside of it. And here's where you find an incredibly polished surface. Some say that they sanded the surface to make it glossy. Other researchers have suggested that an incredible heat source was used in order to vitrify the surface. And on the interior is this slab with a hole in the ceiling, and that can easily fit 3 people lying down. This is one of my greatest pet peeves about Cusco, excuse me, is the abuse of a very sacred medicine called ayahuasca. And unfortunately what's happened to it is it's become like a tourist party drug, whereas in fact it's a very sacred medicine which is used for cleansing and purifying and opening up the psyche. But in Cusco it's become something which is unfortunately readily available, and it's almost like 2-for-1 specials are available at happy hour. And this is simply another structure that's called the Temple of the Monkeys, and again, you see these incredible flat surfaces, and the girl there gives you the sense of scale. As well as depictions of snakes. The snakes were incredibly important to the Inca. They represented the subconscious mind. The puma represented the conscious, and the condor represented the superconscious. So the number 3 is critical in the Inca way of thought, but it's something that they inherited from other cultures. Because the actual brilliance of the Inca people wasn't that they were great inventors, but what they did is as they expanded their civilization, which eventually occupied southern Colombia in the north, the middle of Chile in the south, the Pacific Ocean in the west, and into the Amazon in the east, as they enveloped other cultures, not necessarily conquered them, but enveloped them, they would take all of the great attributes of that culture and take them as their own. And so they were, by the time the Spanish arrived, they were the pinnacle of civilization because they had absorbed and adopted the intelligence of other people. This is a passageway or a labyrinth at a place called Kenko, which is in the same area as the other structures we saw. And again, you can see the surfaces have been shaped at some point in time. And on the interior, there's this what looks like a temple platform or something. But again, it's my contention that the Inca didn't build this. They adopted it or inherited it and used it for their own purposes. And this is one of the most intriguing things. Very few people have ever seen this. Gary and Hugh will see this the next time they come to the Sacred Valley. It's located, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of intriguing things which are not on the tourist maps. And this is one of them. And that's in the same cave. And again, you can see the incredible precision of which this, how this was made. And no one honestly has a clue who made it or what it was used for. But that gives you a sense of the precision of the structure. And the shape of that construction in the cave is also found here at a place called Ollantaytambo. And what you have, it's a very beautiful looking thing, and it's comprised of 3 tiers. And again, that represents the 3 levels of consciousness. What's happened to it now is that it pre-existed the Inca, and what they did is they adopted it and actually turned it into a fountain. They cut this channel here, allowed the water to flow. But the precision of that as compared to this indicates to me that this was done by a much more technically sophisticated people than this, and this is clearly Inca, period. This shape is called the Chincana, and it relates to that previous slide because, again, if you take half of it, you'll see that you have the 3 levels like that. And it's called the Inca cross, but again, it's an example of something that the Inca adopted from someone else. And it looks like a very simple symbol, but any simple symbol often, if it's of an ancient and sacred nature, contains an incredible volume of information. And for example, this, it represents time, energy, space, matter, the 4 seasons, and also the 4 directions, and also the 4 departments of the Inca civilization, the east, the north, the west, and the south, as well as the 3 levels of consciousness which are here, the 3 levels of community service here, and the 3 levels of philosophy there. And if you expand on it, then what it also does is it represents this ancient road called the Capacnan, which is the sacred road. And dotted along this road are many sacred structures. This is Potosi, which is the sacred mountain of silver. This is Tiwanaku. Cusco's on it, and also Cajamarca, which is an ancient sacred city. And oral traditions say that the road has been there basically forever, but not only that, but that there's also a tunnel underneath it that travels from the southern part to the northern part. But no one's actually, as far as I know, been able to enter it. This is Ollantaytambo. And I think to a great extent it's much more intriguing than its more famous neighbor, which is Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is a tourist mecca, which gets 2,000 visitors per day. But Ollantaytambo, just by its existence and nature, shows us the different cultures and different building technologies existed there. This is the great accomplishment of the Inca people. This is called the Andene system. These are terraces. And again, they were able to build the terracing system in places like the Sacred Valley from the valley floor up to the tops of mountains. So that's more than 2,000 vertical feet. But Ollantaytambo contains a lot of very other intriguing things. Here is the men's room. And next to the men's room, almost no one even bothers to observe that, but here's an example of what I think is the first civilization's work. Again, it's somehow they were able to remove these cubes of stone from very hard stone. And as we climb up the staircase with the andenes or terraces on the right, on the left we see this. And this shows us the polygonal system again that exists in Cusco. And this actually is Inca reconstruction. You see, something had happened to the wall, so they added on with stone mixed with mortar in order to fill in spaces. But what's most intriguing are these up on top at the what was the Temple of the Sun. Again, there's a human being to give you a sense of scale. This is clearly a shaped stone, and in this case, I think it actually was a seat, because when you go around and stand behind it and see where the person's sitting, what they would be looking at, you see this, which most people think is a natural phenomenon. But I think it's a combination of a natural shape and something that has been sculpted. If you look here, you can make out an eye. You can hear there probably was a nose that fell off. And here there's a mouth with one fang in it. And this is called, they call this Viracocha, which Viracocha was the creator god. And it's either a depiction of him or it's a depiction of those that came on his behalf, called the Viracochans, who were this mysterious race of tall bearded men. Some stories say they were white, but I think the correct thing is to say they were light-skinned, because to say they were white means they were Europeans, and that gets into major racial controversy. Up at the Temple of the Sun here, again, are some of the stones which conventional archaeology say that the Inca were building this incredible structure. The stone came from across the valley, high up on the mountain, from a specific quarry, and that for some reason in the distant past, the Inca abandoned their project. But the more that I visit the place, I think there was a major catastrophe in the distant past, and that caused the Sun Temple to basically, for all intents and purposes, explode. Because I think this is an indication of the Inca finding the site, and because they revered these ancient ancestors, they built this retaining wall underneath it to stabilize everything. They never seemed to touch any of the ancient creations. What they simply did is usually they would add onto the side of it or to the top of it. They would integrate themselves into the way the ancestors built things. And again, for a sense of scale at the Sun Temple, this is the filming of Ancient Aliens that we did about a year ago. And this is a feature which I believe is found in Egypt and other places. Again, it's where supposedly molten bronze was poured. And this would have been like a capital I shape, and it would be almost like a locking mechanism whereby the stones were fitted together, the bronze was poured, and supposedly that would help to stabilize or maintain the precision and position of the stones. However, during a major earthquake, being bronze, they would simply pop out of place. So others have suggested that the function of the bronze was actually for electromagnetic reasons. That the stone is very high in quartz crystal, and the ancient builders always used stone that was either high in quartz or high in iron, both of which are electromagnetic. So some believe that the function of this was to help energy flow from one stone to the next, almost as if it was a series of batteries, because their precision in fitting would make things fit very tightly, but contact wouldn't be perfect. This would complete theoretically some kind of circuit. This is what is left intact of the Temple of the Sun. The reason why it's still there is that it was built up against the side of a hill. So even a major earthquake wouldn't cause or wouldn't allow it to have come apart, whereas the other sides of the building were open. And the stones, multi-ton stones, are found several, in some cases several hundred feet away and down the side of the mountain. So again, I contend that rather than the standard explanation of the building never having been completed, that in fact it was completed, a catastrophe happened, caused it to fall apart, and that's why we find it in the state it's in today. That's another view of it. And this is kind of intriguing. There are 6 of these major stones, each weigh about 40 tons. And the difference between some researchers and me is that I actually measure the stones. Some people, like to exaggerate and say this weighed 400 tons or 1,000 tons or whatever, but, it's a very simple calculation. If you find out what the density of the stone is and how much it weighs per cubic foot, you simply measure 3 dimensions and calculate the weight. And these do average 40 tons. But in between them are these, which are about that wide. And what they seem to have acted as is earthquake shims. Because this was used for solar alignment and study as well as other things, it was imperative that the wall never move. So by having these shims, if there was a earthquake or tremor running through the area, the shims were able to run up and down, absorbing the shock and keeping the stones from shifting out of position. And this is what the Inca did. They took the remains of the Temple of the Sun, these giant stones that were lying around, and they put them back up, but they put them in an order which was different from the original intent, and then they filled in these areas like that. Most guides and archaeologists won't give you an explanation why this is like that, but I think it's kind of logical that it was a reconstruction during Inca times. The Spanish didn't do any reconstruction that didn't have its need for their purposes, and so sacred structures of the Inca were simply either ignored or were taken apart by the Spanish. And that's just another view of it. But under here again you see an Inca construction underneath it to stabilize it. And this gives you a view, again, I'm not trying to say that the Inca weren't intelligent. This is their terracing system. And the scale of the people gives you a sense of how large these were and how difficult it would have been to construct such a thing. They were incredible agricultural experts. The soil for the Andene system was always great earth taken from the Sacred Valley floor itself, and in some cases, again, carried up 2,000 feet in order to have great topsoil. And the fertilizer was actually brought from the coast, which is about 200 miles away. This is one of the oddest things that exists, and this is the view from the Sun Temple, and it might be hard to make out, but if you follow this line this way, and then follow this line, or a line that would be coming this way, it makes a 90-degree angle. And then if you follow here, that way, this flat surface, and then this angle coming off that way, it's basically half a pyramid, and this is the capstone missing. And the only way you can actually see it is from a mountain in behind where there's a very specific temple. And when you look down from that temple, because of the nature of how this was designed, it appears like a three-dimensional pyramid coming up. 99% of the tour guides in Cusco don't know that exists. There's no explanation for it. So again, I think some ancient people did that for some reason. And this is also at Ollantaytambo. Ollantaytambo is a place where you could spend several hours, because the more you walk around and look, the more intriguing things you find. This is a solid stone wall. And these knobs or protrusions here don't seem to have any function. However, a local expert, a native expert, has said that on the solstices, because Cusco is located about 10 degrees below the equator, the sun basically comes straight over top. You know, it doesn't rise and fall like here. It comes straight over top and down. And on the solstices, at I think it's midday, the sun shines and casts a shadow, and the shadow comes down and locks into this notch right here. So again, it's probably not something the Inca did, because that is very hard andesite stone, and it would have been much easier if they wanted a sundial to build using this technology, which is very fast to do, and simply stick the knobs in and make the channel. But whoever built that, it was obviously easy for them to do this kind of work, but we have no idea who they were or what tools they had. Moving away from the main part of Ollantaytambo, which is just incredibly gigantic. It's 600 hectares in size. You see things like this. Again, seemingly meaningless areas where you have massive chunks of stone, as not laser cut, but as if they were cut out somehow, and the surfaces are polished. But they don't seem to perform any real function that we can think of. And this is in that area. It's called the Temple of the Condor, because if you stand back, it's a natural feature, but if you stand back, this is the head of the condor here, and then this is the wing that sweeps back and down. And throughout this massive stone outcrop, again, you find these odd areas where stone has been removed in seemingly a random fashion, but clearly the ancients knew what they were doing. It's simply we can't interpret them yet. And then right below that is this. This is andesite stone with major quartz veins going through it. Unfortunately, there isn't much left of this area, or whatever it was. It's no longer a building. It's simply piles of stones, and they've tried to stick some together to replicate whatever it was. And here, where you have the solid stone here, and then for some reason they wanted to integrate this one in. And again, the technical precision of that is quite astonishing. And here again, you have a polished surface on the right, and this integration of well-shaped stones into the rock face. And looking directly across from here is this mountain. And what you can see here, this is an Inca, basically grain elevator. It's a place where grain and potatoes were brought up about 1,000 feet and stored, because the area has wind basically 24 hours a day, and the air is normally dry, so they had a natural drying system built into that. Here is what's called the Temple of Viracocha, which I haven't been able to get to because the only trail does lead up this way, but because of this rock scree area, if you tried to step on that, you know, you would wind up here very fast. But it's this which always captures my attention. This again is the face, which most people say is natural, but whether it's natural or not, they built a temple on top of his head, like a crown. And I climbed up there to see what is it, because he has one eye like this, and what is it that he's looking at? And he's actually looking back at the Temple of the Condor. And this gives you a sense of coming in closer to it. Again, there's the grain elevator there. This is the Temple of Viracocha, and there's his head. And that brings you in a little bit closer. And even closer. Again, you can see, maybe it's my imagination, but I think that's a fang in his mouth. And I think that slit is on purpose. You know, the eye is there, and then there's a slit as though that's where the pupil is, or was. And finally, we have Machu Picchu. And Machu Picchu, contrary to what most anthropologists and archaeologists say, because the Spanish never found it, and it's not the only one. There's another city called Choquequirao, which also the Spanish never found. And the conventional story is that Machu Picchu was built by this one high Inca called Pachacutec, and he wanted basically a winter palace. So he sent his workers up there, and they flattened the mountain and built this city of approximately 1,000 people. But the more that I visit this place, the more I can see that at least two other cultures existed prior to the Inca. And again, that's shown by the construction techniques. This is probably just an anomaly, but it does appear that behind the city is a face looking skyward. But, most likely that's just something nature did. Yeah. Okay, thanks. And this is a fanciful depiction of what Machu Picchu would have, would be if it was a face in behind. This is Inca period construction, like we've seen. It's basically dry stacked walls. An engineering marvel in and of itself. But then you find things like this here as well. And they, most guides simply say, well, this was a temple of, or this was something for human sacrifice, which the Inca also didn't do. The Inca were not barbaric people, and they did not conduct human sacrifice. Anyone who's heard of the Inca Trail, that's it in the background. You enter the city from Cusco that way. This simply shows you again the integration of styles. You have the bedrock here, and on the right, I believe the Inca added that. This is the Temple of the Sun, and you can tell just by looking. You look at the sophistication of this as compared to the terraces, and of course some will say special building, special construction, agricultural different, but that's far too simplistic an answer. That shows you the interior. And it's as if they were trying to, as if a later builder was trying to protect something that was inside, this megalithic shaped stone that, whose function is unknown, although of course they'll always say it has to do with the sun and solar alignments, but that's way too simple an explanation. That's what the stone looks like. This is called the Temple of the Three Windows. And again, it's megalithic and contrasts very much in style with that, which is supposed to be, Machu Picchu was supposed to have been built over 30 years, and they wouldn't shift gears like that in terms of construction. Any architect or engineer in any culture wouldn't allow that. That's the interior of another building. And this is the Intihuatana, which is the hitching post of the sun. What's most intriguing about this is that no one's been able to decode what all of these angles do. Again, they'll simply say it was used for solstices or equinoxes, but no culture, as far as I'm concerned, specifically has rituals solely on that. These things are calendars, so daily they are doing some sort of function. It's not just that you wear a bunch of feathers and 4 times a year you come and celebrate there. The other intriguing thing is that it's made out of white granite, which is high in crystal, and it's actually the top of the mountain. It isn't simply a stone. They expose the top of the mountain itself, and people say when they put their hands on it that it radiates, it radiates energy. And this shows you, again, I think, you see this style, and this style, and I contend that those were done by 3 different people. That's called the sacred stone, which is a silhouette of the mountain in behind. And this, the mountain which makes the nose in behind Machu Picchu, this is what's on top of it. And that's simply a plan of the city, and that is how you see the city from the top of the mountain. It's in the shape of a condor facing west. So the genius of the Inca designers was to, they put all sorts of visual clues and things into the building. Okay, that's more or less the end of the slideshow, but thank you very much for your attention. Possible location is Tiwanaku in Bolivia, which is just south of Lake Titicaca. And this, you look at this and you think, well, my God, that's very sophisticated. But the thing to take into account is that all of this was reconstructed in the 1960s. So the only original stones are the standing stones you see here. Everything else was taken from the surrounding area and reassembled according to what the archaeologists thought this structure looked like. So it's very deceiving. You look at that and you go, oh my God, that's sophisticated. This is the famous Gate of the Sun, which is at Tiwanaku, and that's one solid piece of andesite stone. A human being, can walk through there. And you see the crack that is coming down on that side of it. It was found snapped in two, as if there had been a giant cataclysm at some time in the distant past. Some people say the Spanish did that, but the Spanish didn't break it. It was actually found half sunk in the mud, suggesting that it's almost the equivalent of some cottages you'll find here. It's basically dry stacked stone, or in some cases they used adobe mud as a mortar because they didn't know cement. Cement came with the Spanish later on. And then here again is another example of an Inca building. But this isn't what you would think of, those who have been to Peru or those who have read about them, of classic Inca. It's supposed to be perfect, almost perfect construction. And this is on the island of the Moon, which is next to the island of the Sun. And you see this is adobe construction mixed with stone, and that is classic Inca. The Inca were a huge civilization, and they had to, by necessity, build quite rapidly. So the incredible stone constructions would have been not only time-consuming, but again, the toolkit isn't there in the archaeological record. But you see examples of this throughout Cusco and the Sacred Valley of Peru. The other possible. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take you to another continent where it's warmer and back in time to the Inca, which were the largest civilization of the Americas prior to the conquest of the Spanish. And the one thing that the Inca are most well known for is the idea that they were master stonemasons, that they were able to build buildings and walls with such accuracy that you couldn't fit, some people say, a credit card, but in fact a human hair in between the joints. And some of these walls are 300 feet long. So my question on my first trip to Cusco was, how is it possible that they could do that? Because the stone that they used, or stones, were andesite and granite and basalt, and all three of those are incredibly hard stones. They're on the Mohs scale, which is the technical scale, going from 1 to 10, going from talc, which is soapstone, and that's 1, to 10, which is diamond. Most of these are between 6 and 7. And in the archaeological record, the only tools that are found are bronze chisels and stone hammers. Bronze is about 3 on the Mohs scale, so it's literally like trying to saw through a log with a plastic knife. You can't do it, because the material itself is harder than the tools. So that was my initial question. And what I seem to have discovered was that there were 2 civilizations that preceded the Inca, and they were much more highly technically advanced than the Inca themselves. And that goes counter to conventional thought, where civilizations always go in a line of increasing sophistication. But what seems to be, not only in South America but also globally, is that you have cycles of time and you have cycles of civilization. So you have crests and then you have troughs, and that's where the Atlantis concept comes in. So this is the fanciful depiction of who the Inca originators were. Well, golly. And this is a Peruvian artist. So what you have is Peruvian people and others who go, oh my God, they were gods. And then you have the Spanish conquistadors who basically thought they were savages. So obviously the reality of the Inca is somewhere in between. They were human beings. Where did they come from, and where did they, what happened to them? Most stories say that they came from the Lake Titicaca area, which is half of it's in Peru and half of it's in Bolivia. And so when you read all of the oral traditions and the Spanish chronicles, you find out that the island of the sun, which is in the Bolivian half, is probably one of the places where the Inca originated. And this is an Inca-style building. Now, if you look at that, you'll see